I didn't exactly dream of living in Sunnyside Estates, but it was close to work, and the walking trails were perfect for Maverick, my service dog. Maverick's a golden retriever trained to help me manage PTSD from my time in the military. He's calm, obedient, and always wears a service vest when we're out. I know the Americans with Disabilities Act inside and out. You have to when you depend on a service animal. But I never imagined I'd have to cite it to my HOA president. The first time I met Karen Whitfield, she was carrying a clipboard and wearing a frown like it was part of her uniform. She introduced herself as the HOA president in a tone that suggested I should be impressed. Her eyes went straight to Maverick. "I don't recall approving a dog in this community," she said, glaring. I explained politely that Maverick was a service dog, not a pet, and therefore exempt from pet restrictions under federal law. She huffed, muttered something about people always finding loopholes, and walked off. I should have taken that as a warning. Within weeks, I started getting violation notices. One for my grass supposedly being a quarter-inch too high. Another for my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. The third because my garbage was visible from the street for about 45 minutes after pickup. Each was signed with Karen's large, looping signature, complete with a little smiley face that somehow made it feel more like a threat than a friendly gesture. I fixed each issue without argument, hoping it would end there. But at the next HOA meeting, Karen proposed a new rule. All animals, including service animals, must be registered with the board and wear HOA-approved identification. I raised my hand and pointed out that this violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. She cut me off mid-sentence. "Federal laws don't override community standards," she snapped. A few neighbors looked uneasy, but no one spoke up. After the meeting, she leaned in close and said, low enough for only me to hear, "If you want to be difficult, I can be difficult too." Her breath smelled like coffee and something sharper, intimidation. That weekend, I was sitting on my porch with Maverick resting at my feet, enjoying a quiet morning. The sun was warm, the street was still. Then a shadow fell across my lawn. Karen stood there in her khaki shorts and polo shirt, holding a spray bottle. "Your dog is in violation of the new ordinance for not wearing proper HOA identification," she announced loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. I reminded her that Maverick was a service animal protected by federal law. And besides, her rule hadn't even been passed yet. Her face flushed deep red. "I'm tired of you military types thinking you're above the rules," she said, stepping toward my yard. "If you won't comply, I'll handle it myself." Before I could react, she sprayed Maverick directly in the face. He yelped and backed away, pawing at his eyes. I jumped up, moving between them. "What's in that bottle?" I demanded. "Just vinegar and water," she said with a smirk. "Won't hurt him. Maybe now he'll learn to respect authority." I was shaking with anger, and I knew this had just escalated into something much bigger. Years in the military had taught me how to stay calm under pressure. I got Maverick inside, rinsed his eyes thoroughly, and checked him over. The vinegar had irritated him, but there was no lasting damage. Once he was settled, I picked up the phone and called 911. The dispatcher asked for my emergency, and I explained exactly what had happened, that my service dog had been assaulted by my HOA president, and that interfering with a service animal is a federal offense. She took my information and assured me officers were on their way. About 20 minutes later, 2 uniformed officers knocked on my door. I walked them through the situation, showed Maverick service animal certification and training documents, and pointed across the street to Karen's house. One officer stayed to take my full statement, while the other went over to speak with her. From my window, I could see Karen waving her arms and pointing toward my house, her face twisted with outrage. The officer she was talking to didn't look convinced by her performance. When they both returned, they told me Karen had admitted to spraying Maverick, but claimed she was enforcing community standards. They explained that they'd informed her that federal law, specifically the Americans with Disabilities Act, prohibits interfering with a service animal, and that such actions can carry heavy fines or even jail time. Under state law, what she'd done also qualified as animal cruelty. Then they asked if I wanted to press charges. "Yes," I said without hesitation. Karen was handcuffed right there in her driveway. She shouted about having me evicted and warned that the entire neighborhood would turn against me. But the few neighbors who had come outside weren't backing her up. I even heard one mutter, "She's finally gone too far." After the police left, a neighbor I didn't know well came over and apologized. "We've all been intimidated by her for too long," she admitted, glancing at Maverick, who was once again lying calmly by my side. The legal process moved quickly. Karen was charged with interfering with a service animal cruelty, and harassment at her first court appearance. She showed up in designer clothes with a high-priced lawyer who looked more uneasy as the evidence was laid out. The judge was blunt. Community rules do not override federal law, especially when it comes to disability accommodations. While she awaited trial, the HOA called an emergency meeting. I attended with Maverick, and to my surprise, nearly every homeowner showed up. The vice president called for a vote of no confidence, citing her reckless behavior and the legal risk she'd brought to the community. The vote was unanimous. Karen was out. Someone had even replaced her name tag at the board's table with a blank one. In the end, Karen took a plea deal, avoiding a longer sentence but still facing consequences. 30 days in county jail, a $5,000 fine, 200 hours of community service at an animal shelter, and mandatory disability rights education. When the judge read her sentence, her expression shifted from shock to anger to something closer to realization. "But I was just enforcing the rules," she said, as if that somehow excused everything. Karen tried to protest as the bailiff approached, but her voice was weak now, a far cry from the commanding tone she'd used in HOA meetings. The judge leaned forward, his voice firm but even. "The most important rule, Miss Whitfield, is to respect the law of the land, especially laws that protect service animals and the people who depend on them." As she was led away to begin her jail term, our eyes met for a brief moment. The entitlement and superiority that had once defined her expression were gone. In their place was a humbled, almost startled look, the face of someone who had finally come up against a rule she couldn't bend or break. She mouthed something that might have been, "This isn't over," but we both knew it was. Maverick sat at my side, poised and focused, the very image of the service dog professional he was. I reached down and scratched behind his ears. He leaned into my hand, a small but steady reminder of the partnership that had carried me through this fight. Stronger now than ever.